A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. The Curse of Empty. The autumn wind howled through the stone corridors of Moonhaven Castle, carrying with it the scent of dying leaves and approaching winter. In the servants' quarters below, 19-year-old Bryn Fairhaven pressed her back against the cold stone wall, golden hair plastered to her pale cheeks with sweat and tears. Her emerald eyes darted toward the heavy wooden door, listening for footsteps that would signal another humiliation. "The Wolfless freak thinks she can hide from us," came Gareth Ironhold's mocking voice from the corridor beyond. His laughter echoed off the stones, joined by the cruel chuckles of his noble companions. "Come out, aberration. The ceremony awaits your spectacular failure." Bryn's hands trembled as she clutched the rough wool of her servant's dress. Tonight was the annual ceremony of awakening, where young wolves demonstrated their first transformation before the entire kingdom. At 19, she was already a year past the traditional age limit of 18. She was living proof of something that shouldn't exist. A werewolf who couldn't shift. The heavy door creaked open, and Finn's concerned face appeared. His brown hair was disheveled, his clothes bearing the mud stains of his work in the stables. At 20, he was one of the few people in the castle who still treated her with kindness. "Bryn, they're gathering in the great hall," he whispered urgently. "Lady Cordelia sent me to fetch you. You can't avoid this forever." "I can't do it, Finn." Her voice cracked like brittle ice. "Everyone will see that I'm broken, that I'm nothing." Finn stepped closer, his expression gentle but determined. "You're not nothing. You're the strongest person I know. You've survived things that would have destroyed others." Bryn thought of her parents, dead these 7 years in what Lady Cordelia had called a tragic hunting accident. She had been 12 then, too young to understand the whispered conversations that stopped whenever she entered a room. Too naive to question why the woman who had taken her in as a ward treated her more like a slave than family. "My parents would be ashamed," she whispered, touching the small silver pendant at her throat, the only thing she had left of them. "Your parents loved you," Finn said firmly. "Whatever happens tonight, that doesn't change." The sound of approaching footsteps made them both freeze. Lady Cordelia Ironhold swept into the room, her auburn hair twisted into an elaborate arrangement that spoke of wealth and power. At 35, she commanded respect through fear rather than affection. Her brown eyes, cold as winter stones, surveyed Bryn with barely concealed disgust. "Still cowering like a beaten dog, I see," Cordelia said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "How disappointing, though not unexpected. Come, child, the kingdom awaits your performance." Bryn forced herself to stand, though her legs felt weak as water. "My lady, perhaps it would be better if I remained here tonight. I don't wish to embarrass your house." Cordelia's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "Embarrass my house? Dear child, you've been doing that since the moment I took pity on you. Tonight, at least, we'll make your shame official." The great hall blazed with torchlight and the excited chatter of nobles from across the kingdom. Tapestries bearing the crests of various houses decorated the stone walls, while long tables groaned under the weight of elaborate feasts. At the far end of the hall, a raised platform awaited the evening's ceremonial transformations. Bryn took her place among the servants along the wall, trying to make herself invisible. But the whispers followed her like hunting hounds. "Look, it's the cursed girl. 19 and still human. What an abomination. They say her parents were traitors. Perhaps the curse runs in the bloodline." Each word was a dagger to her heart, but Bryn kept her face carefully blank. She had learned long ago that showing pain only encouraged more cruelty. The ceremony began with the younger nobles, 16 and 17-year-olds who shifted with graceful ease. Their wolves were beautiful, silver, brown, and gray creatures that moved with predatory elegance. The crowd applauded each transformation, parents beaming with pride. Then came Gareth's turn. Lady Cordelia's son stepped onto the platform with arrogant confidence, his red hair catching the torchlight. At 22, he had shifted years ago, but tradition demanded he demonstrate his abilities before taking on greater responsibilities within the house. His transformation was smooth and practiced. His russet wolf was large and powerful, drawing appreciative murmurs from the assembled nobles. When he shifted back to human form, he wore a smirk of supreme satisfaction. And now, Lady Cordelia announced, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "We come to a special case. Bryn Fairhaven, ward of House Ironhold, will attempt her first transformation at the advanced age of 19. The whispers grew louder, more excited. This wasn't just ceremony now. It was entertainment. Bryn felt hundreds of eyes upon her as she made her way to the platform on unsteady legs. "Go on, then," Gareth called out, his voice full of malicious glee. "Show us your magnificent wolf, little servant." Bryn closed her eyes and reached deep within herself, searching for the spark of wildness that every werewolf possessed. She had tried this countless times in private, straining until her head pounded and her body ached. But now, with the entire kingdom watching, she tried once more. Nothing. The silence stretched on, broken only by the crackling of torches and the soft shuffle of feet. Bryn opened her eyes to find every face staring at her with expressions ranging from pity to disgust to cruel amusement. "Perhaps she needs encouragement," someone called out, and laughter rippled through the crowd. "Or perhaps she's exactly what we suspected," Gareth said, stepping closer to the platform. "A broken thing that doesn't belong among true werewolves." The words hit her like physical blows. Bryn stepped down from the platform, her cheeks burning with shame. But as she moved toward the servants' exit, Gareth's voice stopped her. "Where are you going, aberration? The ceremony isn't finished. Surely you have some explanation for your deficiency." Bryn turned back, something flickering in her chest. Not the wolf she longed for, but something else. Something that had been building for years under the weight of constant humiliation. "I have no explanation that would satisfy you, my lord," she said quietly. "But I am still here. Still standing. Whatever I am or am not, I survive." For just a moment, something shifted in the crowd's energy. A few faces showed surprise at her quiet dignity. But Gareth's sneer only deepened. "Survival isn't strength, servant. It's just stubbornness." He gestured dismissively. "Remove this embarrassment from my sight." As Bryn finally escaped to the servants' quarters, she didn't notice the way some of the older nobles exchanged meaningful glances. Nor did she see ancient Arian, the castle's herb woman, watching from the shadows with knowing eyes. That night, Bryn lay on her narrow cot in the servants' quarters, staring at the ceiling. Sleep eluded her, driven away by the echoing laughter of the great hall. But when exhaustion finally claimed her, the dreams came as they always did. A white wolf, larger than any she had ever seen, stood at the edge of a moonlit forest. Its eyes glowed with golden fire as it gazed at her with infinite patience. In the dream, Bryn could feel its power, its ancient wisdom, its desperate desire to reach her. But every time she tried to step closer, the wolf faded like morning mist. She woke with tears on her cheeks and a hollow ache in her chest that felt like grief for something lost before it could be found. Chapter 2. The Storm. Alpha arrives. 3 days after her public humiliation, Bryn carried a wooden bucket of scrub water through the castle's main corridor, her movements automatic after years of servitude. The stone floors gleamed from her morning's work, though she knew Lady Cordelia would find fault regardless. Her emerald eyes were rimmed with exhaustion. The dreams of the white wolf had grown more vivid each night, leaving her restless and aching. The sudden thunder of hooves in the courtyard made her pause. Through the tall windows, she could see a procession of riders approaching through the morning mist. At their head rode a man whose very presence seemed to command the autumn air itself. Even from this distance, Bryn could sense something different about him, a power that made her skin prickle with awareness. "Move, you worthless creature," Gareth's voice cut through her contemplation. He strode past her with his usual arrogance, nearly knocking the bucket from her hands. "Lord Ronan Stormheart arrives, and Mother wants everything perfect. Try not to embarrass us further." Bryn's breath caught. Ronan Stormheart, the most powerful alpha in the 7 kingdoms, ruler of Valdris, the northern territory that controlled the mountain passes and commanded respect from all other regions. What could bring such a man to their modest castle? She hurried to complete her tasks, but curiosity drew her to the servants' entrance of the great hall as the formal reception began. Through a crack in the heavy wooden door, she could observe without being seen. Lord Ronan stood before Lady Cordelia's throne, and Bryn felt her heart skip at her first clear sight of him. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark brown hair that fell in waves to his collar, but it was his eyes that captured her, storm gray and penetrating, as if they could see straight through to a person's soul. A thin scar cut through his left eyebrow, adding to his dangerous appeal. "Lord Stormheart," Lady Cordelia purred, rising from her chair with practiced grace. "What an unexpected honor. To what do we owe this pleasure?" Ronan's voice was deep and resonant, carrying easily through the hall. "I'm investigating certain irregularities surrounding the death of Alpha King Aldwin. My sources suggest the circumstances were questionable." A subtle tension crept into Cordelia's posture. "How tragic that you doubt the official report. The Alpha King's hunting accident was thoroughly investigated by my late husband's men." "Your late husband's men," Ronan repeated, his tone neutral but somehow threatening. "How convenient that they're no longer available for questioning." Bryn watched, fascinated, as the two powerful figures circled each other verbally. Lady Cordelia's smile never wavered, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her chair. "Surely you don't suspect foul play," Cordelia said with a light laugh. "Who would dare harm the Alpha King? And more importantly, who would benefit from such a terrible act?" "An excellent question," Ronan replied. "I intend to find the answer." The formal dinner that evening was a tense affair. Bryn moved between the tables like a ghost, refilling wine goblets and removing empty plates. She had learned to make herself invisible during such gatherings. But tonight she felt hyper-aware of every sound, every glance. As she approached Lord Ronan's seat to refill his wine, disaster struck. Gareth chose that moment to gesture wildly while telling some boastful story, his elbow catching her arm. The pitcher tilted, sending dark red wine cascading down the front of Ronan's fine doublet. The great hall fell silent. Bryn's face burned with mortification as she stared at the spreading stain. In any other circumstance, such clumsiness would result in a severe beating. She dropped to her knees immediately. "My lord, I beg your forgiveness," she whispered, not daring to look up. "I am clumsy and worthless. Please allow me to stand up." The command was quiet, but absolute. Slowly, Bryn rose to her feet, finally meeting those storm-gray eyes. Instead of anger, she saw curiosity, and something else she couldn't identify. "What's your name?" Ronan asked, his voice gentler than she expected. "Bryn Fairhaven, my lord." His head tilted slightly. "Fairhaven. That name, interesting." He studied her face with an intensity that made her cheeks burn. "How old are you, Bryn Fairhaven?" 19, my lord." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. 19. "And you serve in this house?" Before Bryn could answer, Lady Cordelia's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "The girl is my ward, Lord Stormheart. An orphan I took in from charity. I'm afraid she's rather damaged. She has never manifested her wolf." Murmurs rippled around the table. Ronan's gaze never left Bryn's face. "Never manifested? At 19? A genetic deficiency," Gareth added with cruel satisfaction. "We keep her around for simple tasks. She's harmless enough." "Harmless," Ronan repeated, and Bryn caught an odd note in his voice. How unusual. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of whispered conversations and meaningful glances. Bryn completed her duties mechanically, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time she looked up, she seemed to catch Lord Ronan's eye across the room. Later, as the guests retired for the night, Bryn made her way to the servants' quarters through the castle's darker corridors. She was nearly at her destination when rough hands seized her arms, slamming her against the stone wall. "Well, well," Gareth's wine-soaked breath washed over her face. "Made quite an impression on our noble guest, didn't you?" His friends flanked him. 3 young nobles whose faces were flushed with drink and malice. Bryn's heart raced as she recognized the dangerous gleam in their eyes. "I meant no disrespect, my lord," she said carefully. "The wine was an accident." "Oh, I'm sure it was," Gareth sneered. "But accidents have consequences, don't they, boys?" One of his companions laughed nastily. "Maybe we should teach the wolfless freak about proper behavior." Gareth's hand moved to her throat, pressing against the silver pendant there. "This is pretty. Where did a servant get such a fine piece? It was my mother's. Bryn gasped. Your mother the traitor? Gareth's grip tightened. Perhaps we should relieve you of this burden. I wouldn't do that if I were you. The voice came from the shadows, low and deadly. Lord Ronan stepped into the torchlight, his presence filling the corridor like an approaching storm. His gray eyes blazed with controlled fury as he took in the scene. My lord. Gareth stammered, immediately releasing Bryn. We were just discussing the evening's events. Were you? Ronan's voice was silk over steel. It looked more like you were threatening a defenseless servant. She's not defenseless, one of Gareth's friends protested. She's cursed. Everyone knows. The words died in his throat as Ronan's power filled the air. Even Bryn, with her dormant abilities, could feel the crushing weight of his authority. The three young nobles stepped back involuntarily, their faces pale. Return to your quarters, Ronan commanded. All of you. Now. They fled like rabbits before a wolf, leaving Bryn alone with the most powerful alpha in the 7 kingdoms. She pressed her back against the wall, uncertain whether she was safer or in greater danger. Are you injured? His voice was gentle again, the threatening edge gone. Bryn touched her throat where Gareth's hand had been. No, my lord. Thank you for your intervention. Ronan stepped closer, and she caught his scent. Pine forests and winter storms, wild and intoxicating. Why do they call you cursed? Because I cannot shift, she whispered. At my age, it means I never will. His gray eyes studied her with that same intense curiosity she'd noticed earlier. And yet, my lord? He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingertips brushed her cheek with surprising gentleness. You have the most unusual scent. So faint I can barely detect it, but Bryn's breath caught. No one had ever mentioned her having any scent at all. Most assumed her lack of shifting meant she had no wolf scent whatsoever. What do you smell? She whispered. Ronan's thumb traced across her cheekbone, sending shivers through her entire body. Something wild. Something precious. Something that shouldn't be hidden away in servants' quarters. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibilities neither dared voice. Then Ronan stepped back, the connection broken. Be careful, Bryn Fairhaven, he said quietly. This castle holds more dangers than young nobles with too much wine. He turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Bryn alone with her racing heart and the lingering scent of pine and storms. That night, her dreams changed. The white wolf was no longer alone at the forest's edge. A great black wolf stood beside her, its golden eyes familiar and warm. Together, they watched Bryn with patient understanding, as if waiting for her to find the courage to join them in their moonlit world. Chapter 3. Buried Secrets. The morning after Lord Ronan's arrival brought an unusual tension to the castle. Bryn noticed it in the way servants whispered in corners, how Lady Cordelia's smile seemed more brittle than usual, and in the frequent messengers who arrived at dawn carrying sealed letters. She went about her duties with heightened awareness, the memory of Ronan's gentle touch still burning on her cheek. Bryn, child, come here. The voice belonged to Irian, the ancient herb woman who tended the castle's sick and injured. At 65, she was bent with age, but her gray eyes remained sharp as winter stars. Most of the nobles ignored her, dismissing her as merely another servant. But Bryn had always felt drawn to the old woman's quiet wisdom. Irian waited in the small chamber she used for preparing medicines, dried herbs hanging from the rafters like fragrant curtains. The air smelled of sage, lavender, and something darker that Bryn couldn't identify. Sit, my dear, Irian said, gesturing to a wooden stool. We need to speak of things long buried. Bryn settled herself, noting how Irian's weathered hands trembled slightly as she moved among her bottles and pouches. Is something wrong? You seem troubled. Troubled? Irian's laugh was brittle as autumn leaves. Child, I have been troubled for 7 years, ever since the night your parents died. The words hit Bryn like a physical blow. What do you mean? They died in a hunting accident. Everyone knows lies. Irian interrupted sharply. Your parents, Aldrich and Meredith Fairhaven, were murdered because they discovered something that threatened powerful people. Something about bloodlines and birthrights that certain individuals would kill to keep secret. Bryn's hands clenched in her lap. That's impossible. If you knew this, why didn't you speak before? Because speaking would have meant your death as well, Arian said, her voice heavy with old pain. I have watched over you these 7 years, child, keeping you alive the only way I knew how, by letting them believe you were nothing. Wolfless, powerless, harmless. But I am those things, Bryn whispered, though something deep in her chest stirred restlessly. Arian moved to an old chest in the corner, her movements deliberate despite her age. From within its depths, she withdrew a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with time. This belonged to your mother. She hid it before the end. Read, child. Learn what you truly are. With trembling fingers, Bryn opened the journal. Her mother's elegant handwriting filled the pages, documenting research into ancient bloodlines and royal genealogies. But it was a particular passage that made Bryn's breath catch. The legend speaks of the White Wolf ancestral, the first alpha queen who united the 7 kingdoms under one crown. Her bloodline was thought extinct after the Great War, but Aldrich has found evidence that suggests otherwise. If our suspicions are correct, if the royal line survived in hiding, then the rightful heir to the throne still lives. The child bears the mark. She will manifest when the time is right, when danger calls forth her true nature. Bryn's fingers flew to the silver pendant at her throat, suddenly understanding its significance. The mark, she breathed. Your mother foresaw that revealing the truth too early would mean death for you all, Arian explained. The current ruling families have built their power on the assumption that the royal line died out. Your existence threatens everything they've worked to achieve. Lady Cordelia, Bryn said, pieces clicking together. She knew. That's why she took me in. Not from charity, but to control me, to control you, to diminish you, to make you believe you were nothing, Arian confirmed. And it might have worked, if not for Lord Ronan's arrival. Bryn looked up sharply. What does he have to do with this? Arian's eyes glinted with something that might have been hope. True alphas can sense royal blood, even when it's dormant. His presence has awakened something in you, hasn't it? You feel it stirring. Before Bryn could answer, the sound of approaching footsteps made both women freeze. Arian quickly hid the journal beneath a pile of herb pouches, just as Gareth pushed through the chamber door without knocking. What are you doing here, freak? He demanded, his red hair disheveled and his clothes bearing the marks of sword practice. Mother wants the floors in the Great Hall scrubbed again. Apparently, last night's wine stains weren't properly removed. Bryn stood slowly, her mind still reeling from Arian's revelations. Of course, my lord. I'll attend to it immediately. As she moved toward the door, Gareth grabbed her arm roughly. And stay away from our noble guest. Mother's noticed how he looks at you and she's not pleased. I have no idea what you mean, Bryn said quietly. Don't play innocent with me, Gareth snarled. Whatever game you think you're playing, whatever you think you can gain from his attention, forget it. You're nothing, and you'll always be nothing. He shoved her toward the door, but Bryn caught herself against the frame. For just a moment, as anger flared in her chest, she felt something respond. A warmth spreading through her limbs. A strength that felt foreign and familiar all at once. Gareth must have seen something in her face because he stepped back, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Just remember your place, he muttered before stalking away. That afternoon, as Bryn worked alone in the Great Hall, Lord Ronan appeared as silently as morning mist. She hadn't heard him approach, but suddenly he was there, his presence filling the vast space. You missed a spot, he said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. Bryn looked up from where she knelt, scrubbing the stone floor. My lord, I didn't hear you enter. Forgive me, You should have nothing, he interrupted gently. I came looking for you. The word sent warmth spreading through her chest. Looking for me. But why? Instead of answering directly, Ronan moved closer, his gray eyes studying her face with that same intense curiosity. Tell me about your parents, Bryn. The question caught her off guard. There's little to tell, my lord. They died when I was 12. A hunting accident. His expression suggested he found her answer as unsatisfying as she did. And before they died? What did they do? My father worked with genealogies, bloodline records for various houses. My mother she was interested in old stories, legends and histories. The words came hesitantly, memories surfacing that she'd tried to bury. Old stories, Ronan repeated thoughtfully. What kind of stories? Bryn set down her scrub brush, her hands trembling slightly. Stories about the time before the 7 kingdoms were divided. About the royal line that once united them all. Something shifted in Ronan's expression. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. The White Wolf legend. You know it? Bryn asked, surprised. Every alpha knows the stories, he said quietly, though most dismiss them as fairy tales. The first alpha queen, blessed by the moon goddess herself, who could command the loyalty of all wolves. They say her bloodline carried special gifts, healing, foresight, the ability to inspire absolute devotion. But it's just a legend, Bryn said, though her mother's journal seemed to burn against her memory. Is it? Ronan knelt beside her, bringing them to eye level. What if I told you that some bloodlines leave traces, even when they're hidden? What if I said that true power sometimes sleeps until the right moment awakens it? Before Bryn could respond, the great hall's doors burst open. Lady Cordelia swept in with her usual dramatic flair, but Bryn caught the flash of alarm in her brown eyes when she saw them together. Lord Stormheart, Cordelia said, her voice honey-sweet but with underlying steel. I trust you're finding everything satisfactory with your accommodations? Ronan rose smoothly, his movement casual, but somehow protective as he positioned himself slightly in front of Bryn. Quite satisfactory, thank you. I was just discussing the castle's history with Miss Fairhaven. She has a fascinating knowledge of genealogical records. Does she? Cordelia's smile grew sharper. How industrious of her, though I fear her education may be somewhat incomplete. Orphans often have such limited perspectives on historical matters. On the contrary, Ronan said coolly, I find that those outside the nobility often possess the most unbiased understanding of true history. They have nothing to gain from perpetuating convenient fictions. The verbal thrust hit its mark. Cordelia's composure cracked just slightly, enough for Bryn to glimpse the calculating intelligence beneath her gracious facade. Of course, Cordelia recovered smoothly. Though I wonder if your investigation wouldn't benefit from speaking with those who actually lived through recent events. Those with first-hand knowledge of the Alpha King's final days. An excellent suggestion, Ronan agreed. I'll be sure to interview everyone who was present during that time. Every witness, every servant, every person who might have observed something significant. The threat in his words was subtle, but unmistakable. Cordelia's knuckles whitened where she gripped her skirts. Naturally, she said. Transparency serves everyone's interests. Bryn, dear, I believe Cook needs assistance in the kitchens. You mustn't keep her waiting. It was a dismissal, clear and final. Bryn rose, gathering her cleaning supplies. As she passed Lord Ronan, their fingers brushed briefly. The contact sent electricity racing up her arm, and for one startling moment, she felt something else. A presence at the edge of her consciousness, wild and powerful and achingly familiar. Be careful, he murmured, too quietly for Lady Cordelia to hear. Some secrets are more dangerous than others. That night, Bryn lay on her narrow cot, her mother's journal hidden beneath her mattress. The conversation with Ronan replayed in her mind, along with Irian's revelations about her true heritage. The pendant at her throat seemed warm against her skin, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. As sleep finally claimed her, the dreams came with new intensity. The White Wolf stood in a moonlit clearing, no longer alone. Surrounding her were dozens of other wolves, an entire pack bowing their heads in reverence. But at the center of the vision stood a figure Bryn finally recognized. Herself. No longer the cowering servant, but standing tall and proud, power radiating from her like starlight. In the dream, she finally understood what Irian had tried to tell her. She wasn't broken, or cursed, or incomplete. She was exactly what she was meant to be. The sleeping queen, waiting for her moment to wake. Chapter 4. The Hunt and Discovery. A week after Bryn's encounter with the journal, Lady Cordelia announced a grand hunting expedition to honor Lord Ronan's visit. The entire castle buzzed with preparation as nobles polished their weapons and servants readied supplies for the 3-day venture into the Whispering Woods. Bryn watched the activity with growing unease, her newfound awareness making her sensitive to the undercurrents of tension flowing through the castle. "You seem troubled, child," Arian observed as they worked together in the herb garden, gathering supplies for the hunting party's medical kit. Bryn's hands paused over a cluster of healing mint. "Something feels wrong about this hunt. Lady Cordelia has been too pleased with herself, and Gareth keeps shooting meaningful glances at his friends. Trust your instincts," the old woman advised, her weathered fingers selecting particular herbs with practiced care. "Your bloodline carries gifts of foresight. The closer you come to awakening, the stronger these premonitions will become. But what can I do? I'm just a servant." "No one listens to servants." Arian's gray eyes fixed on her with startling intensity. "You could ensure you're present to witness whatever they plan. Servants are often invisible to their betters, a trait that can be quite useful." The idea was audacious and dangerous, but it took root in Bryn's mind like a stubborn seed. That evening, as the hunting party made final preparations, she approached the head groom with a carefully rehearsed request. "Master Willem," she said, keeping her voice respectful and humble, "Cook is concerned about Lord Ronan's dietary preferences during the hunt. She's asked me to accompany the party to ensure his meals are properly prepared." Willem, a gruff but kind man who'd known her parents, studied her face carefully. "Dangerous work, hunting parties. Lots of things can go wrong in those woods. I understand the risks," Bryn said quietly, "but I have my reasons." Something in her tone must have convinced him, because he nodded slowly. "There's an extra horse in the stables. Small mare, gentle but quick. If you're determined to go, best you can ride properly." The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with autumn mist clinging to the castle walls like ghostly fingers. Bryn had barely slept, her dreams filled with images of white wolves running through dark forests and storm-gray eyes that seemed to see straight through her soul. She dressed carefully in her plainest traveling clothes and braided her golden hair into a practical plait. The silver pendant lay hidden beneath her collar, its weight a constant reminder of the secrets she now carried. The hunting party assembled in the courtyard as the sun crested the eastern mountains. Lord Ronan sat astride a magnificent black destrier, his presence commanding even among the gathered nobles. He wore practical hunting leathers that emphasized the powerful lines of his frame, and his dark hair caught the morning light like polished bronze. Lady Cordelia rode side saddle on a dainty white palfrey, her burgundy riding habit immaculate despite the early hour. She surveyed the assembled party with satisfaction, her brown eyes lingering on certain faces with meaningful intensity. "My lords and ladies," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "Today we hunt in the ancient tradition, testing our skills against the wild creatures of the Whispering Woods. May fortune favor the bold." The party moved out with much fanfare, hounds baying and horses prancing with excitement. Bryn rode near the rear with the other servants, her small mare keeping pace despite its modest size. She noticed how certain members of the party, Gareth and 3 of his closest friends, stayed close to Lord Ronan, their behavior solicitous, but somehow predatory. The Whispering Woods lived up to their name, filled with the constant rustle of leaves and the distant calls of unseen creatures. Ancient oaks and towering pines created a canopy so thick that only scattered beams of sunlight reached the forest floor. The hunting trails were well marked, but Bryn couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched by more than woodland animals. After several hours of riding, the party stopped beside a crystalline stream for their midday meal. The servants unpacked elaborate picnic provisions while the nobles discussed their morning's sport. Several deer had been taken, along with a wild boar that required 6 men to carry. Bryn busied herself with serving duties, but her attention remained fixed on the subtle dynamics playing out among the hunters. She noticed how Gareth and his companions kept maneuvering to separate Lord Ronan from the main group, suggesting private conversations about hunting strategies that required moving deeper into the woods. "The old oak grove would be perfect for afternoon sport," Gareth was saying, his tone casual but his eyes bright with anticipation. "The deer trails converge there, and the terrain provides excellent stalking opportunities." Lord Ronan studied the young man with those penetrating gray eyes. "I'm not familiar with that particular area. Perhaps you could guide me there?" "Of course, my lord. It would be my honor." Something cold settled in Bryn's stomach as she watched the exchange. The oak grove lay in the deepest part of the forest, far from the main hunting trails. If something happened there, help would be hours away. As the party prepared to resume hunting, Bryn made her decision. While the others mounted their horses, she slipped away into the underbrush, following the stream that would lead toward the oak grove. Her mare was tethered with the other servants' horses. She would have to proceed on foot and trust in her knowledge of these woods from childhood explorations. The forest grew darker and more mysterious as she moved deeper into its heart. Her soft-soled boots made little noise on the carpet of fallen leaves, and she found herself moving with an instinctive stealth that surprised her. More than once, she paused as strange sensations washed over her. Awareness of distant animals, the feel of wind patterns through the trees, scents that spoke of things her conscious mind couldn't interpret. She reached the oak grove just as Lord Ronan and his guides arrived from the opposite direction. Hidden behind the massive trunk of an ancient tree, Bryn watched as the small party dismounted in the shadowy clearing. "Magnificent trees," Lord Ronan observed, his voice echoing strangely in the enclosed space. "They must be centuries old." "Indeed," Gareth agreed, though his attention wasn't on the oaks. "My lord, there's something we need to discuss. Something about your investigation that requires privacy." Ronan's posture shifted subtly, becoming more alert. "I'm listening." What followed made Bryn's blood run cold. Gareth and his companions weren't there to hunt deer. They were there to eliminate the threat that Lord Ronan represented to Lady Cordelia's ambitions. The conversation revealed a conspiracy that reached back to the death of the Alpha King, a carefully orchestrated murder designed to clear the path for Cordelia's rise to power. "You've been asking too many questions," Gareth said, his hand moving casually toward the hunting knife at his belt. "Mother thought you might be reasonable, but you're proving troublesome." "Troublesome," Ronan repeated, his voice deadly quiet. "That's an interesting choice of words." The attack came without warning. 3 of them moved simultaneously, coordination speaking of careful planning. But they had underestimated their target. Lord Ronan was an alpha in the truest sense, his reflexes enhanced by supernatural speed and strength. The fight was brief but vicious. Steel rang against steel as hunting knives clashed with Ronan's sword. But even an alpha could be overwhelmed by numbers, especially when those numbers included trained warriors fighting with desperate determination. Bryn watched in horror as a blade found its mark, slicing deep across Ronan's ribs. He stumbled, blood staining his leather jerkin, and she saw Gareth raise his knife for a killing blow. Something snapped inside her chest. Not breaking, but awakening. Power flooded through her limbs like liquid fire. Her vision sharpened impossibly, showing her every detail of the grove with crystal clarity. Sense exploded across her senses. Fear, blood, metal, and beneath it all, something wild and ancient rising to meet the danger. She burst from her hiding place with inhuman speed, her body moving with coordination she'd never possessed. Her hand closed around a fallen branch as thick as her arm, wielding it like a weapon with strength that should have been impossible for her slight frame. The first attacker went down hard, his skull cracking against an oak trunk. The second barely had time to turn before her improvised club caught him across the temple. Gareth spun to face this new threat, his face twisted with shock and rage. "You," he snarled, raising his bloody knife. "Impossible. You're nothing. You're—" His words died as he met her eyes. They blazed with golden fire. No longer the gentle green of her human form, but something far older and more dangerous. For the first time in his life, Gareth faced a predator that outmatched him completely. The third attacker made the mistake of trying to flank her. Without conscious thought, Bryn spun and caught him with a backhand blow that sent him flying across the clearing. The crack of breaking ribs echoed through the grove like thunder. Gareth backed away, his knife trembling in his grip. "What are you? This isn't possible. Mother said you were broken, that you had no wolf." Bryn stepped toward him, power radiating from her small frame like heat from a forge. "Your mother lied about many things, but this ends now." Before Gareth could respond, the sound of approaching horses filled the grove. The rest of the hunting party had followed the sounds of combat, arriving to find their noble companions scattered across the ground like broken dolls. Lord Ronan struggled to his feet, one hand pressed against his bleeding side, his gray eyes fixed on Bryn with wonder and something deeper. "How?" he whispered. "How did you—" "I don't know," Bryn said honestly, the golden fire fading from her eyes as the immediate danger passed. "I felt you were in danger, and something inside me just responded." Lady Cordelia rode into the grove at that moment, taking in the scene with rapidly calculating eyes. Her son knelt in the leaves, his knife forgotten as he stared at Bryn in terror. 3 of her co-conspirators lay unconscious around the clearing, while Lord Ronan bled from injuries that should have been fatal. "What happened here?" she demanded, though Bryn could see that she already understood far too much. "Your son and his friends attempted murder," Ronan said quietly, his voice carrying absolute authority despite his injuries. Fortunately, Miss Fairhaven arrived in time to prevent it. Cordelia's gaze fixed on Bryn, and for the first time, the servant girl saw genuine fear in those calculating brown eyes. "Impossible," she breathed. "You're nothing. You've always been nothing." "No," Bryn said simply, finally understanding the truth that had been hidden from her for so long. "I've always been exactly what I was meant to be. I just needed the right moment to remember." As the hunting party dealt with the aftermath of the attack, Bryn helped support Lord Ronan back to his horse. His blood soaked through her sleeve where she touched him, but she felt no revulsion, only a fierce protectiveness that seemed to sing in her bones. "Thank you," he murmured as they rode slowly back toward the castle. "You saved my life." "You would have done the same," she replied, though she wasn't sure how she knew that with such certainty. His storm-gray eyes found hers, and she saw recognition there, not just of her actions, but of what she was becoming. "Yes," he said quietly, "I would have," without hesitation. The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning, speaking of bonds forged in crisis and destinies finally beginning to unfold. As they emerged from the whispering woods, Bryn felt the silver pendant pulse against her throat, warm with promises of revelations yet to come. Chapter 5. Betrayals and Revelations. The 3 days following the attack in the Oak Grove transformed the castle into a pressure cooker of whispered conversations and meaningful glances. Lord Ronan recovered from his injuries with supernatural speed, though he bore the scars as evidence of how close death had come. Gareth and his surviving conspirators languished in the castle's dungeons, their fates awaiting Lord Ronan's judgment. Bryn found herself caught between worlds, no longer invisible as a mere servant, but not yet acknowledged as anything more. The other servants regarded her with a mixture of awe and fear, while the nobles watched her with calculating suspicion. Only Arian seemed unsurprised by recent events, nodding sagely whenever their paths crossed as if everything was unfolding exactly as expected. It was on the 4th morning that Lord Ronan made his declaration. The great hall had been transformed for a formal gathering, with representatives from neighboring houses present to witness whatever pronouncement the powerful Alpha intended to make. Lady Cordelia sat in her chair of state, her composure perfect despite the circumstances, though Bryn noticed the subtle tremor in her hands. "Lords and ladies," Ronan began, his voice carrying easily through the stone chamber. "Recent events have revealed truths that can no longer be hidden. Miss Bryn Fairhaven is not merely a servant in this house. She is my destined mate, blessed by the moon goddess herself." The declaration hit the assembled nobles like a thunderbolt. Gasps and exclamations filled the air as heads turned toward where Bryn stood frozen among the servants along the wall. Her heart hammered against her ribs as every eye in the hall fixed upon her. "Furthermore," Ronan continued, his gray eyes finding hers across the crowded space, "I formally claim her as my chosen companion and future Luna of House Stormheart." Lady Cordelia rose slowly from her chair, her face a mask of controlled fury. "My lord," she said, her voice honey-sweet but edged with poison. "Surely you speak in haste. The girl is damaged, wolfless. Surely such a union would weaken rather than strengthen your noble bloodline." "Damaged?" Ronan's tone grew dangerous. "The woman who single-handedly defeated 3 trained warriors to save my life. The woman whose courage and strength shine like a beacon in the darkness of this place? Courage born of desperation, perhaps? Lady Cordelia replied smoothly. But my lord, consider the implications. A Luna who cannot shift, who has no connection to her wolf nature. What message does this send to your pack? To your enemies? Murmurs of agreement rippled through portions of the crowd. Bryn felt their doubt and disdain washing over her like a tide of poisoned water. The moment she had dreamed of, being publicly acknowledged, being valued, was turning into another nightmare of judgment and rejection. The girl has bewitched him. Someone whispered loudly enough to be heard. Used some servant's trickery to ensnare his affections. Unnatural, another voice agreed. An alpha mating outside his own kind. Lord Ronan's power filled the hall like an approaching storm, making the air itself heavy with authority. Enough, he commanded, and silence fell instantly. I know what I have seen. I know what I sense. Miss Fairhaven carries gifts that transcend your limited understanding. But Lady Cordelia had found her opening and pressed forward ruthlessly. Gifts? She laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. My lord, if you must know the truth about this girl's parentage, then perhaps it's time to reveal why she has lived as my ward all these years. Bryn's blood turned to ice water in her veins. She could see triumph glittering in Cordelia's brown eyes, as the woman prepared to deliver what she clearly believed would be a killing blow. The truth, my lord, is that her parents were traitors to the crown. Aldrich and Meredith Fairhaven were executed, not killed in a hunting accident as we've allowed people to believe, but executed for plotting against the Alpha King himself. The lie was delivered with such conviction that even Bryn felt a moment's doubt. Around the hall, faces turned toward her with expressions ranging from horror to disgust. The word traitor echoed in whispers as noble families distanced themselves from potential contamination. Her bloodline is cursed, Lady Cordelia continued, her voice rising with theatrical passion. Tainted by treachery and weakness. I took her in from Christian charity, but I've always known she carried the seeds of her parents' corruption. Lord Ronan stepped forward, his gray eyes blazing with fury. You dare speak of corruption? You who orchestrated the murder of the Alpha King? You who sent assassins into the forest to eliminate an inconvenient witness? Careful, my lord, Cordelia replied, her smile never wavering. Accusations require proof, whereas the evidence of this girl's unfitness is obvious to all. She has bewitched you with servant's cunning, using your noble nature against you. The political maneuvering was masterful. By questioning Bryn's worthiness, rather than denying the assassination plot, Lady Cordelia shifted the focus away from her own crimes. The assembled nobles found it easier to believe that a servant girl had used feminine wiles to ensnare their powerful guest, than to accept that one of their own was a murderer. Perhaps, suggested Lord Aldwyn of House Ravenclaw, his voice diplomatically neutral, this matter requires more careful consideration. Surely Lord Stormheart would benefit from time to reflect, away from immediate influences. Agreement rumbled through the hall. Bryn could see the political tide turning against them, isolating Ronan from his potential allies by making his judgment seem compromised. I require no time for reflection, Ronan declared firmly. My choice is made, but is hers, Lady Cordelia asked smoothly. Has anyone asked what the girl herself desires? Perhaps she finds the prospect of leaving her humble station as overwhelming as we do. All eyes turned to Bryn, and she felt the weight of destiny pressing down on her shoulders like a physical force. This was her moment. She could speak, could defend herself and Ronan, could claim her place at his side. But Lady Cordelia's years of conditioning held her paralyzed. The constant reinforcement that she was nothing, worthless, broken, it all crashed down on her at once. Surrounded by hostile faces, accused of bewitching the man she had come to love, she felt the old familiar shame rising like bile in her throat. She began, her voice barely above a whisper. I never sought to bewitch anyone. I am what you all say, nothing special. Perhaps Lord Ronan would be better served by a mate worthy of his station. The words tasted like ashes, but she forced them out. Better to spare him the political consequences of defending her than to drag him down with her supposed unworthiness. Something shattered in Ronan's expression. pain, disappointment, and a grief so profound it made her chest ache. "Bryn," he said quietly, "you don't understand what you're saying." "I understand perfectly," she replied, hating herself with each word. "I understand that I am a servant, that my parents were traitors, and that I have brought nothing but trouble since the moment you arrived." The political pressure in the room shifted again, nobles relaxing as the threat to the established order seemed to dissolve. Lady Cordelia's smile was radiant with victory. "There, you see," she said gently, as if comforting a wounded animal. "The girl knows her place. She has no desire to rise above her station and bring shame upon your noble house." Ronan stood in the center of the hall, isolated by Bryn's apparent rejection and the noble's relief at avoiding an uncomfortable precedent. His gray eyes found hers one last time, and she saw the exact moment when his hope died. "As you wish," he said formally, his voice empty of all warmth. "I withdraw my claim. Miss Fairhaven remains a ward of House Ironhold, subject to Lady Cordelia's authority." The dismissal was final, absolute. Bryn felt something precious tear apart inside her chest as Ronan turned away, his broad shoulders rigid with controlled emotion. "However," he continued, his tone growing hard as winter steel, "given recent events, I believe it would be best if I continued my investigation from elsewhere. I'll be departing at dawn." "Of course," Lady Cordelia agreed quickly, eager to see him gone before he could cause more trouble. "We understand completely. Travel safely, my lord." That evening, as the castle settled into uneasy quiet, Bryn sat alone in her small chamber, staring at the leather journal that contained her mother's research. The words on the pages seemed to mock her now. Prophecies of a royal bloodline, legends of the White Wolf ancestral, promises of power and destiny that had proven to be nothing but fantasy. A soft knock at her door made her look up. Arian entered without waiting for permission, her aged face grave with disappointment. "Foolish child," the old woman said bluntly. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I've saved him from making a terrible mistake," Bryn replied, though her voice lacked conviction. "Lady Cordelia was right. I would only have weakened him." "Lady Cordelia is a murderer and a liar," Arian snapped. "And you've just handed her everything she wanted on a silver platter." "What was I supposed to do? Stand there and watch as his reputation was destroyed because of me? Let him sacrifice his position for someone who can't even shift?" Arian moved closer, her gray eyes blazing with frustration. "You were supposed to trust in what you are, instead of what others have told you to believe. You were supposed to have faith in the mate bond that even a blind fool could see burning between you." "There is no mate bond," Bryn said desperately. "That was just wishful thinking. Political necessity. He needed an excuse to investigate Lady Cordelia's crimes, and I provided convenient cover. Is that what you truly believe?" Arian asked softly. "After everything that's happened, after the power you manifested in the forest, after the way your very soul responds to his presence." Bryn's hands trembled as she closed the journal. "It doesn't matter what I believe. He's leaving at dawn. It's over." Arian studied her for a long moment, then shook her head sadly. "No, child. It's only beginning. Lady Cordelia won't rest now that she knows you're a threat. Lord Ronan's protection was the only thing keeping you safe, and you've just thrown it away." "What do you mean?" "I mean," Arian said grimly, "that by tomorrow night, you'll either be dead or gone from this place forever. Lady Cordelia can't risk leaving you alive now that she knows what you might become." The old woman turned toward the door, then paused. "There's still time, if you can find the courage to claim what's rightfully yours. But time is running short, and dawn comes whether we're ready or not." After Arian left, Bryn lay on her narrow cot, staring at the ceiling as tears tracked silently down her cheeks. Outside her window, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, and she could hear the distant rumble of thunder approaching. By morning, Lord Ronan would be gone, taking with him her last chance at something resembling happiness. But more than that, she realized with growing dread, he would also be taking the only protection she had against Lady Cordelia's ambitions. Arian was right. Her brief moment in the spotlight had made her a liability that couldn't be allowed to survive. As lightning flickered outside her window, Bryn finally understood that her choice in the Great Hall hadn't saved anyone. It had simply ensured that when the end came, she would face it utterly alone. Chapter 6. The Awakening of the White Wolf. The night after Lord Ronan's departure brought no peace to Moonhaven Castle. Bryn lay sleepless on her narrow cot, her heart heavy with the weight of lost possibilities. Through her small window, she could see storm clouds gathering on the horizon, and something in the charged air made her skin prickle with unease. She had made the right choice, she told herself for the 100th time. Better to spare Ronan the political consequences of defending her than to drag him down with her supposed unworthiness. But the hollow ache in her chest suggested that righteousness was a cold comfort when it meant losing the only person who had ever seen her as more than nothing. The soft creak of floorboards in the corridor made her freeze. It was well past midnight. No servant should be moving through the castle at this hour. Bryn held her breath, listening as careful footsteps approached her chamber door. The latch lifted silently, and 3 figures slipped into her room like shadows given form. Even in the darkness, she recognized their shapes. Lady Cordelia, flanked by 2 of her most trusted guards. They moved with predatory purpose, believing their prey to be helpless and unaware. "Carefully now," Cordelia whispered, her voice carrying a satisfaction that made Bryn's blood run cold. "We mustn't damage her too badly. It needs to look like she tried to escape and met with a tragic accident in the forest." Bryn forced herself to remain still, breathing slowly and evenly as if deep in sleep. Through barely cracked eyelids, she watched as one of the guards approached with a length of rope, while the other positioned himself by the window. "Such a shame," Cordelia continued softly. The poor girl, overcome with grief at Lord Ronan's rejection, fled into the wilderness in despair. Wolves or bandits must have found her before we could organize a rescue. Tragic, really. The guard reached for her, and Bryn moved. The power that had awakened in the oak grove blazed to life again, but stronger now, more focused. She rolled away from grasping hands with inhuman speed, her bare feet finding purchase on the stone floor as she sprang to her feet. "Impossible," Cordelia breathed, her composed facade cracking as Bryn faced them with eyes that glowed like golden flames in the darkness. The first guard lunged forward, confident in his size and strength advantage. He discovered his mistake when Bryn's palm struck his chest with enough force to send him flying backward into the stone wall. The crack of breaking ribs echoed through the small chamber as he crumpled unconscious to the floor. The second guard drew his sword, the steel singing as it cleared its sheath. "Witch," he snarled, circling her cautiously. "Demon spawn." "Neither," Bryn said quietly, power thrumming through her voice in a way that made the very air shiver. "Just someone who's finally tired of being afraid." Lady Cordelia backed toward the door, her brown eyes wide with terror and calculation. "Guards!" she screamed. "Help! The servant girl has gone mad!" But before reinforcements could arrive, the window behind them exploded inward. Glass shattered across the floor, as a figure in a dark traveling cloak vaulted through the opening with fluid grace. Lord Ronan straightened slowly, his gray eyes taking in the scene with deadly comprehension. "I thought you had left," Bryn gasped, her heart lurching with hope and confusion. "I tried," he replied grimly, never taking his eyes off Lady Cordelia. "Made it perhaps 5 miles before something told me to turn back. A good thing, it seems." The remaining guard made the mistake of trying to attack, while Ronan's attention was divided. The Alpha moved like liquid lightning, his hand closing around the man's throat and lifting him off the ground with casual strength. "Drop the sword," Ronan commanded, his voice carrying the absolute authority of his wolf nature. The weapon clattered to the floor as the guard's face turned purple. "Now then," Ronan said conversationally, releasing his grip enough to let the man breathe. "Perhaps Lady Cordelia would like to explain why she's conducting midnight visits to a servant's quarters with armed men and rope." Cordelia drew herself up to her full height, attempting to reclaim some dignity despite the circumstances. "The girl attacked my guards without provocation. She's clearly dangerous, possibly possessed by dark magic. I was trying to restrain her before she could harm others." "Dark magic?" Ronan's tone was deceptively mild. "How interesting. And what would you call the poison you used to murder the Alpha King? Or the silver weapons your son employed against me in the forest? You have no proof of such wild accusations." Cordelia snapped, though perspiration beaded on her forehead. Your obsession with this servant has clearly affected your judgment. Perhaps, Ronan agreed, though I find it curious that you felt the need to eliminate her so urgently. Almost as if you're afraid of what she might become. During their verbal sparring, Bryn became aware of a strange tugging sensation in her chest, as if something was calling to her from beyond the castle walls. The silver pendant at her throat grew warm, pulsing in rhythm with her accelerated heartbeat. "We need to leave," she said suddenly, the certainty rising from some deep instinct. "Now. Tonight." Ronan's gaze flicked to her, reading the urgency in her expression. "Where?" "I don't know," Bryn admitted, "but somewhere safe. Somewhere I can understand what's happening to me." Before anyone could respond, the sound of running footsteps filled the corridor outside. Lady Cordelia's screams had finally roused the castle guards, and soon they would be trapped. "The window," Ronan decided quickly. "Can you manage the climb down?" In response, Bryn gathered her skirts and swung her legs over the windowsill. The drop to the courtyard below would have terrified her a week ago. But now she felt no fear. Power flowed through her limbs like liquid starlight, making the impossible seem routine. She landed in the courtyard with cat-like grace, her bare feet silent on the cobblestones. Ronan followed a moment later, his warrior's training evident in the controlled way he absorbed the impact. "The stables," he murmured, taking her hand. "My horse is still saddled." They ran through the sleeping castle like ghosts, avoiding the paths of torchlight as guards searched for intruders. Ronan's destrier waited in the shadows, stamping impatiently as if sensing the urgency of their flight. "Where are we going?" Bryn asked, as Ronan lifted her onto the horse's back before swinging up behind her. "Somewhere your questions can be answered," he replied, his arms encircling her as they rode out into the storm-lashed night. "There's someone you need to meet." They rode hard through the darkness, following paths that seemed to exist more in Ronan's memory than in any visible reality. The storm that had been building all evening finally broke around them, sending sheets of rain cascading from the black sky. But instead of misery, Bryn felt exhilarated. The wild weather seemed to echo something awakening in her own nature. After hours of hard travel, they finally stopped at what appeared to be ruins, half swallowed by the forest. Ancient stones thrust up through thick undergrowth, their surfaces carved with symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the lightning's intermittent illumination. "What is this place?" Bryn asked as they dismounted near a structure that might once have been a temple. "The Sanctuary of the First," Ronan replied, his voice reverent. "Built by the original Alpha Queen to honor the moon goddess who blessed her bloodline. If answers exist anywhere, they exist here." As they approached the ruined temple, a figure emerged from the shadows between the ancient columns. Bryn expected to see Arian, but instead found herself facing a woman she didn't recognize. Tall and regal, with silver hair that seemed to capture moonlight despite the cloudy sky. "You're late," the woman said calmly, as if she had been expecting them. "Though I suppose that's fitting." The royal bloodline was always prone to dramatic timing. "Royal bloodline?" Bryn repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman smiled, and in that expression, Bryn saw shadows of her own features, reflections of her mother's face in old portraits. "My dear child," the woman said gently, "allow me to introduce myself properly. I am Seraphine Fairhaven, your grandmother, and the last guardian of the sacred bloodline." The revelation hit Bryn like a physical blow. "That's impossible. My grandmother died when I was small." "I allowed that fiction to protect you," Seraphine replied, "just as we allowed many lies to keep you safe until the time of awakening arrived. But that time is now upon us, and deception serves no further purpose." She gestured toward the ruined temple, where carved symbols were beginning to glow with soft silver light. "Come, child. It's time you learned what you truly are, and why so many have died to keep that knowledge hidden." As they entered the ancient sanctuary, Bryn felt power thrumming through the very stones beneath her feet. The pendant at her throat grew warmer, resonating with forces that had slept in this place for centuries. "The White Wolf Ancestral," Seraphine began, her voice taking on the cadence of ritual, "was not merely the first Alpha Queen. She was chosen by the moon goddess herself to unite the 7 kingdoms under one crown. Her bloodline carried gifts that transcended normal werewolf abilities, The power to heal, to inspire absolute loyalty, to commune directly with the divine forces that shape our world. But she died, Bryn protested. The bloodline was lost in the Great War. Hidden, Seraphine corrected. Not lost. We learned that power attracts enemies, that being too visible invites destruction. So we went underground, scattered to the far corners of the kingdoms, waiting for the time when the blood would run true again. She turned to face Bryn fully, and in the growing silver light, her resemblance to both Bryn and her mother became unmistakable. That time is now, granddaughter. You are the White Wolf reborn, destined to reclaim the throne that is yours by divine right. The words should have filled Bryn with joy or triumph, but instead she felt only crushing weight. I can't even shift, she said desperately. How can I be anything special when I can't even manage what every other werewolf does naturally? Because your wolf is not like others, Seraphine replied gently. She is the avatar of the moon goddess herself, too powerful to manifest without proper preparation and ritual. Tonight, under the storm moon, with your true mate beside you, she will finally be free. Bryn looked at Ronan, who had remained silent throughout these revelations. His gray eyes held wonder and something deeper, recognition, as if pieces of a long puzzle were finally falling into place. You knew, she accused softly. You knew what I was. I suspected, he admitted. From the moment we met, something in you called to something in me. The mate bond only forms between souls of equal power. I knew you had to be more than you appeared. And now? She asked, her voice trembling with hope and terror in equal measure. Now we find out what the moon goddess has planned for us both, he replied, taking her hand as thunder rolled overhead and the ancient temple blazed with silver fire. The awakening was about to begin. Chapter 7. The White Queen's Revenge. 3 months had passed since Bryn's awakening in the ancient temple, and in that time, the 7 kingdoms had buzzed with whispers of the returned White Wolf. From her hidden stronghold in the northern mountains, she had gathered loyal followers. Werewolves who remembered the old stories, nobles who had grown weary of corrupt leadership, and common folk who yearned for justice. The transformation ritual had been beyond anything she could have imagined. When her wolf finally emerged under the storm moon, it was magnificent, pure white as fresh snow, larger than any wolf in recorded history, with eyes that blazed like golden stars. The ancient bloodline had awakened fully, bringing with it abilities that transcended normal werewolf nature, accelerated healing, supernatural strength, and most importantly, the power to inspire absolute loyalty in other wolves. Now, as autumn gave way to winter, the time had come to reclaim what was rightfully hers. The coronation is set for today at sunset, Commander Aldrich reported, his weathered face grim with distaste. The grizzled veteran had been among the first to pledge his loyalty when word spread of Bryn's true identity. Lady Cordelia will be crowned Queen of the 7 Kingdoms in the Great Cathedral. Half the nobility will attend, hoping to curry favor with the new regime. Bryn stood at the window of her mountain retreat, watching snow fall across the peaks. Her golden hair was now adorned with a simple silver circlet. Not the crown of the kingdoms, but an ancient symbol of her bloodline's authority. She wore traveling clothes of fine white leather, practical, but unmistakably regal. Perfect, she said quietly. Let them all gather in one place. It will make our message more efficient. Ronan approached from behind, his presence warming her like sunlight. The mate bond had grown stronger since her awakening, creating a connection between them that transcended mere attraction. He was her anchor, her strength, her partner in all things. Are you ready for this? He asked softly, his hands settling on her shoulders. Bryn leaned back against his broad chest, drawing comfort from his solid warmth. I've been ready since the night my parents died. Since the first time Gareth called me worthless. Since Lady Cordelia decided that murdering a king was preferable to accepting rightful succession. Through the window, she could see their assembled forces. 200 of the finest warriors from various kingdoms, all united under the banner of the White Wolf. It wasn't a large army by traditional standards, but when each soldier was a werewolf loyal unto death, numbers became less significant. The cathedral will be heavily guarded, Aldrich warned, Cordelia isn't a fool. She knows there are those who question her claim to the throne. Good, Bryn replied, turning to face her war council. I want witnesses. I want every noble in the 7 kingdoms to see what happens when someone tries to steal what belongs to the rightful heir. The ride to the capital took most of the day, their force moving through snow-covered forests like hunting wolves. Bryn rode at their head, her white wolf form magnificent against the winter landscape. In this shape, she felt truly complete, powerful, graceful, connected to the wild forces that shaped the world. They reached the outskirts of the capital as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. The great cathedral rose like a mountain of carved stone in the city's heart, its spires reaching toward the darkening sky. Torches blazed from every window, and the sound of celebration echoed through the streets. They're making merry, one of Bryn's lieutenants observed with disgust. Celebrating the coronation of a murderer. Let them celebrate, Bryn said calmly, shifting back to human form as they approached the cathedral square. It will make their shock all the more profound. The plaza before the cathedral teemed with people, nobles in their finest clothes, common folk hoping to catch a glimpse of the ceremony, and guards stationed at every entrance. The air hummed with excitement and political tension, as the greatest gathering in decades prepared to witness history. Bryn and her force approached openly, making no attempt at stealth. Her white leather gleamed in the torchlight, and the silver circlet on her brow caught and reflected the flames like captured starlight. Conversations died as people recognized the symbol she wore, the ancient mark of the royal bloodline. By the goddess, someone whispered. It's her. The white wolf. The whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. Guards reached for their weapons, but uncertainty stayed their hands. This wasn't a typical attack. It was something far more dangerous, a challenge to the very foundations of power. The cathedral doors stood open, revealing the magnificent interior blazing with candlelight. At the far end of the nave, Lady Cordelia knelt before the high altar, while the kingdom's most senior clergy prepared to place the crown upon her head. She wore robes of deep purple silk, her auburn hair elaborately arranged beneath a golden circlet that would soon be replaced with the true crown of the kingdoms. Bryn walked through the cathedral doors with the steady pace of absolute certainty. Her followers spread out behind her, their presence filling the sacred space with the quiet menace of predators who had finally cornered their prey. The ceremony faltered as whispers spread through the assembled nobility. Heads turned toward the disruption, and shocked gasps echoed off the vaulted ceiling as people recognized the young woman they had dismissed as a worthless servant. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" demanded Archbishop Matthias, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent cathedral. "This is a sacred ceremony. Guards, remove these." "I wouldn't," Bryn said quietly, but her voice carried to every corner of the vast space. "Unless you wish to explain to the moon goddess why you crowned a murderer and usurper in her sacred house." Lady Cordelia rose slowly from her knees, her brown eyes blazing with fury and calculation. She had aged in the months since Bryn's escape, stress and paranoia carving lines around her eyes and mouth. "Guards," she commanded, "arrest this pretender and her followers for disturbing the peace and threatening the crown." But the guards hesitated. Something about Bryn's presence, her quiet authority, made them reluctant to act. In the uncertain silence, she began to walk down the center aisle toward the altar. "Lords and ladies of the 7 kingdoms," she said, her voice growing stronger with each step. "You are about to witness the coronation of a woman who murdered your rightful king and has spent years suppressing the truth of the royal succession." "Lies!" Cordelia shrieked. "This girl is delusional, poisoned by wild fantasies. She has no claim to anything." "No claim?" Bryn reached the steps leading to the altar and began to climb. "I am Bryn Fairhaven, daughter of Aldrich and Meredith Fairhaven, granddaughter of Seraphine Fairhaven, direct descendant of the White Wolf ancestral, who first united these kingdoms under one crown." She paused on the highest step, turning to face the assembled crowd. "I am the rightful heir to the throne you seek to steal, Cordelia Ironhold, and I have come to claim what is mine." The transformation began without warning. Power blazed through Bryn's human form as she called upon her wolf nature. But this was no ordinary shift. Light erupted from her skin like captured moonbeams as her body expanded and changed, growing into the magnificent white wolf that dwarfed all others. Gasps and cries of awe echoed through the cathedral as nobles witnessed something from the oldest legends made manifest. The white wolf stood nearly as tall as a horse, her fur gleaming like fresh snow, her golden eyes blazing with divine authority. "Impossible," Cordelia breathed, backing away from the altar. "This cannot be real." The white wolf's response came not in words, but in power that washed over every werewolf in the cathedral like a tide. One by one, nobles who had been sitting or standing dropped to their knees as their wolves recognized and submitted to the ultimate alpha. Even those who had never shifted felt the compulsion, their human nature overwhelmed by the presence of divinity made flesh. Lady Cordelia alone remained standing, her face twisted with desperate rage. "I will not bow," she snarled. "I have worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to yield to some peasant girl with delusions of grandeur." The white wolf regarded her with patient golden eyes, then began to shift back to human form. But the power remained, radiating from Bryn like heat from a forge as she faced her enemy. "You murdered King Aldwyn," she said, her voice carrying absolute authority. "You orchestrated attempts on Lord Ronan's life. You tried to have me killed to protect your stolen throne. Do you deny these charges?" "I deny nothing," Cordelia screamed, her composure finally cracking completely. "I did what was necessary to secure the future of these kingdoms. You think your bloodline makes you fit to rule? You're nothing but a servant girl who got lucky." "Perhaps," Bryn agreed calmly. "But I am a servant girl who commands the loyalty of every wolf in this room. While you command nothing but fear and hate." As if to prove her point, Gareth chose that moment to stumble forward from where he had been kneeling among the other nobles. Lady Cordelia's son looked haggard and broken, his red hair unkempt and his clothes disheveled. "Mother," he gasped, reaching toward her with desperate hands. "Please, stop this. She is what she claims to be. Can't you feel it? The power, the authority? We cannot fight the moon goddess herself." Lady Cordelia stared at her son with disgust. "Weak," she spat. "Just like your father, bowing to power instead of seizing it." But even as she spoke, Bryn could see the defeat in her eyes. Surrounded by kneeling nobles, faced with the manifest power of the royal bloodline, Lady Cordelia finally understood that her ambitions had reached their end. "I offer you a choice," Bryn said quietly. "Submit now, confess your crimes, and accept exile from these kingdoms. Or continue this charade and face the justice that your victims deserve." For a moment, silence stretched through the cathedral like a held breath. Then Lady Cordelia drew herself up to her full height, fixing Bryn with a stare full of venom and pride. "I choose neither," she snarled, and suddenly there was a knife in her hand, a silver blade gleaming with deadly purpose. She lunged toward Bryn with desperate fury, but her attack never landed. Ronan had shifted to his massive black wolf form and intercepted her charge, his jaws closing around her wrist with crushing force. The knife clattered across the marble floor as Lady Cordelia's scream of pain echoed through the sacred space. "Enough," Bryn commanded, and Ronan released his grip, allowing the broken woman to collapse at the altar steps. Lady Cordelia lay gasping, cradling her injured arm. Her dreams of power finally shattered beyond repair. Around the cathedral, the assembled nobles watched in awed silence as history rewrote itself before their eyes. "Lords and ladies of the 7 kingdoms," Bryn said, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast space. "Bear witness. The age of lies and corruption ends here. The rightful queen has returned to claim her throne." She reached down and lifted the true crown from where it had fallen during the struggle, an ancient circlet of silver and moonstone that had adorned the heads of the royal bloodline for generations untold. "I am Bryn of House Fairhaven, the White Wolf reborn, and I claim the throne of the 7 kingdoms by right of birth, by blessing of the moon goddess, and by the will of those who serve me." As she placed the crown upon her own head, every werewolf in the cathedral, noble and common alike, raised their voices in a howl of recognition and submission that shook the very stones of the ancient building. The White Queen had returned, and her reign of justice was about to begin. Chapter 8. The New Era. 3 months after her coronation, Queen Bryn Fairhaven stood on the balcony of the royal palace, watching the sun rise over a kingdom transformed. The early spring air carried the scent of blooming flowers and new beginnings, a stark contrast to the harsh winter that had marked the end of Lady Cordelia's corrupt reign. The woman who had once scrubbed floors now wore a gown of flowing white silk, the ancient crown of the kingdoms resting easily upon her golden hair. But more than her clothes had changed, there was a quiet confidence in her bearing now, a sense of rightful authority that even her former tormentors could not deny. "Your Majesty," came a familiar voice from behind her. Bryn turned to see Finn approaching, though he now bore the insignia of a royal knight, rather than the rough clothes of a stable hand. His loyalty during her darkest days had been rewarded with a position of honor in her new court. "Just Bryn when we're alone," she said with a warm smile. "You earned that right long before I wore a crown." Finn grinned, some of his old casual manner returning. "The council is gathering in the throne room. Lord Ronan sent me to fetch you," though he used considerably more formal language. Bryn's heart lightened at the mention of her husband. Their wedding had taken place just weeks after her coronation, a ceremony that united not just 2 hearts, but 2 of the most powerful bloodlines in werewolf history. Ronan had insisted on taking the title of Alpha Consort rather than king, declaring that he had no desire to rule over the woman who commanded his absolute devotion. They made their way through corridors that had once echoed with Lady Cordelia's harsh commands, but now buzzed with the quiet efficiency of a court dedicated to justice rather than self-interest. Servants who had once cowered in fear now moved with dignity, knowing their queen understood their struggles from personal experience. The throne room had been transformed as well. Gone were the ostentatious displays of wealth that had marked the previous regime. In their place hung tapestries depicting the history of the royal bloodline and the legends of the White Wolf ancestral. The throne itself remained unchanged, an ancient seat of carved silver and white stone that seemed to glow with inner light whenever Bryn occupied it. "Your Majesty," Commander Aldrich said as she entered, offering a respectful bow. The grizzled veteran now served as her chief military advisor, his experience invaluable in rebuilding the kingdom's defenses. "We have reports from all 7 territories." Bryn took her place on the throne, noting how naturally the crown's weight rested on her head now. To her right stood Ronan, magnificent in his formal robes as Alpha Consort, his storm-gray eyes warm with pride as they watched her take command of the realm. "Speak freely," she commanded, settling into the rhythm of governance that had become as natural as breathing. "The harvest reports are excellent across all territories," Aldrich began, consulting a series of scrolls. "Your reforms regarding orphaned children and late-manifesting werewolves have been well received by the common folk. The nobility adjusts more slowly, but they adjust nonetheless." Bryn nodded with satisfaction. One of her first acts as queen had been to establish sanctuaries for children who lost their parents, ensuring they would never again face the systematic abuse she had endured. Additionally, any werewolf who manifested their abilities after the traditional age would be celebrated rather than scorned, a change that had already prevented several tragic outcomes. "And what of Lady Cordelia's remaining supporters?" she asked. "Most have bent the knee and accepted pardons in exchange for loyal service," Aldrich replied. "Those who refused have been exiled to the northern wastes as you commanded. They pose no immediate threat." Lady Cordelia herself had been offered the same choice, exile or execution. In a final display of the mercy that marked her reign, Bryn had chosen to spare her enemy's life, though she had made it clear that any attempt to return would result in immediate death. The former usurper now lived in bitter isolation beyond the kingdom's borders, her dreams of power reduced to memories. "What of Gareth?" Bryn asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Still in the dungeons, Your Majesty," Aldrich confirmed. "He continues to refuse all offers of clemency, claims he would rather die than serve the woman he once called worthless." Bryn felt a pang of something that might have been pity. Gareth's pride had always been his defining characteristic, and apparently even imprisonment couldn't cure him of it. "Keep offering," Eventually, he may come to understand that stubborn hatred serves no one. Your Majesty is too merciful, muttered Lord Aldwyn of House Ravenclaw, one of the nobles who had initially opposed her claim, but now served with grudging respect. Perhaps, Bryn agreed calmly. But I would rather err on the side of mercy than repeat the mistakes of those who came before me. The meeting continued for another hour, covering trade agreements, military deployments, and the countless administrative details that kept a kingdom functioning. Bryn listened to each report with careful attention, her mind cataloging information and weighing decisions with the wisdom that seemed to flow from her royal bloodline. When the formal business concluded, most of the courtiers departed to attend to their various duties, but Arian remained, now bearing the title of royal advisor, though she insisted on keeping her simple herb-woman's robes. "You wish to speak with me privately?" Bryn asked, as the ancient woman approached the throne. Arian's weathered face creased into a knowing smile. "Indeed, Your Majesty. There are certain developments that require discussion." Before Bryn could ask what she meant, Ronan moved closer to the throne, his hand coming to rest on her shoulder in a gesture that spoke of deep intimacy and shared secrets. "Tell her," he murmured, his voice warm with anticipation. Bryn looked between them in confusion, then understanding began to dawn as she noticed the particular way Arian was studying her face and figure. "The sickness that has troubled you these past weeks," Arian said gently. "The fatigue, the changes in appetite, the heightened sensitivity to certain scents, are signs of pregnancy," Bryn finished, her hand moving instinctively to her still flat stomach. "I'm with child." The confirmation sent a wave of emotion through her, joy, wonder, and a fierce protectiveness that seemed to emanate from her very core. The royal bloodline would continue, and her child would grow up knowing love and security, rather than abuse and rejection. "The heir to the White Wolf legacy," Ronan said softly, his own voice thick with emotion. "Our son or daughter will never know the struggles you endured." "How long?" Bryn asked, her mind already racing with implications and preparations. "Perhaps 2 months along," Arian estimated. "By autumn, the 7 kingdoms will have a new prince or princess." That evening, as the sun set over the kingdom she now ruled, Bryn walked through the royal gardens with Ronan at her side. The space that had once been reserved for nobles now served as a public park, where common folk could bring their children to play among the flowers. "Are you happy?" Ronan asked, as they paused beside a fountain decorated with carved wolves. Bryn considered the question seriously. 3 months ago, she had been a powerless servant convinced of her own worthlessness. Now she wore a crown and carried the heir to an ancient bloodline. The transformation seemed like something from a fairy tale rather than reality. "I am," she said finally, surprised by how easily the truth came. "Not because of the crown or the power, but because I finally understand who I was always meant to be." She turned to face him fully, her green eyes bright with contentment. "I was never broken, never cursed, never worthless. I was just waiting for the right moment, the right circumstances, the right person to help me become who I truly am." Ronan cupped her face gently in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones with infinite tenderness. "And who is that?" "Bryn Fairhaven," she replied with quiet certainty. "Queen of the 7 kingdoms, mate to the most honorable alpha in existence, and soon to be mother to the next generation of the royal bloodline. But most importantly, I am someone who remembers what it feels like to be powerless, and who will spend her reign ensuring that no one else has to endure what I survived." Their kiss was gentle, but full of promise, a pledge of continued partnership in all things. Around them, the kingdom settled into peaceful evening routines, secure in the knowledge that their ruler understood their struggles and would protect their interests. As they made their way back to the palace, Bryn caught sight of a white wolf running along the forest's edge. Not herself, but one of the wild creatures that seemed drawn to her presence. The sight filled her with deep satisfaction. The kingdom was healing, growing stronger under her guidance, and the future stretched ahead bright with possibility. Later that night, as she lay in the royal bed with Ronan's protective arms around her, Bryn reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Every humiliation, every moment of despair, every instance where she had been called worthless or broken. It had all been necessary preparation for this destiny. The servant girl who had once scrubbed floors was gone, transformed into a queen who would reshape the 7 kingdoms according to principles of justice and mercy. The white wolf had returned, just as the ancient prophecies foretold, and her reign would be remembered as the beginning of a new golden age. Outside the palace windows, the moon shone down on a realm at peace, blessing the woman who had reclaimed her birthright and the man who loved her completely. In the months and years to come, their story would be told in every corner of the kingdom, a tale of transformation, justice, and the power of love to overcome any obstacle. But for now, Queen Bryn Fairhaven of the 7 kingdoms simply smiled in her sleep, one hand resting protectively over the new life growing within her, secure in the knowledge that she had found her true place in the world at last. The White Wolf's legacy would continue, and with it, the promise of a better future for all who dwelled within her domain.